and welcome to this From the Top segment on TI Now here at the Open Networking Summit in Santa Clara, California. We're talking with the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Affirm Networks, Hassan Ahmed. And Hassan, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks, Abe. Nice to be here.
Thanks for being here. We're going to be talking about NFV and SDN today. I want to start by asking you, there's a little bit of talk about what NFV is and what NFV isn't. From your perspective, what is the primary benefit of NFV?
So, Abe, you know, when operators really started to embrace NFV, it was really a response to something that was happening in the marketplace. At the end of the day, operators needed to be able to scale their networks economically, and they needed to be able to compete with IP service providers, and that meant they had to be able to create services. So anything that allows you to achieve those two objectives was really what operators were after. And I think it's there's good and bad approaches to NFV. What we see a lot of in the marketplace is people trying to take legacy products and package them as software and say, okay, that's NFV. But the problem with that is you end up with the software version of the same old inflexible network that we started with. And so in my opinion, that's really not what NFV's objectives are, and certainly doesn't really fall into the NFV category. But fresh approaches that really allow you to take dramatic advantages in cost of scaling, dramatic advantages in how fast you can put up services. That's the promise of NFV. Those are the solutions that I think will win.
I think at a conference like the Open Networking Summit, you talk about the overriding and high-level benefits of a new technology like NFV or SDN. But are there tangible benefits that you can, present to the industry right now that gives an ROI on NFV?
Oh yeah, very much so. And in fact, one of the great things from our perspective is we have about 25 or so customers who are actually deploying networks with us. So we have a lot of data that we're able to kind of codify into real networks. And I would tell you that one of the primary drivers for operators was this economic scaling. From that perspective, the total cost of ownership of a network that's based around NFV, we find is about 30%, so 70% reduction off of a legacy network. That's really critical for an operator whose data is growing like crazy, but their ARPU isn't growing. And then the other big advantage, people can be sometimes afraid of moving to new technologies. They worry about whether they're going to have to give up something from the nice legacy thing that they've already had working in their network. And what we've found, and one of the, I think, really remarkable tangible benefits that operators see is that these new platforms that are software-based, in fact, way outperform the best of the legacy platforms. So in a lot of ways, not only do you get all those total cost of ownership advantages, but there's actually no downside to trying to head in that direction. The reality is you're wasting money if you're not doing it. And then that's, I think, what's led to some of these operators adopting our solutions and moving forward.
I think another thing you see at a conference like ONS is the embracement of open standards, open sourcing. How has that trend increased in speed, if you will, for NFV and SDN deployments?
I think open standards, and in particular open source software, is an unstoppable trend in networking today. I can tell you the benefit to us as we were developing this capability for our operator customers to use was remarkable. Our use of open source allowed us to probably develop a much more advanced product with about a 3x advantage in speed of development. The open standards are critically important because what you want to do is create this ecosystem of suppliers where the operator has choice and they can pick best of breed of everything and put it all together and just have it work. And without open standards, you really can't put that together. And I think the amount of work that the internet community has done on open standards and APIs has become of tremendous value in this whole NFV development.
Now, TI Now has been able to cover NFV and SDN over the last 2 or even 3 years. What was the trigger point or the tipping point, if you will, from the theory of SDN NFV to the deployment of SDN NFV?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of really seminal events in my view. One thing that really changed, and again, our perspective comes from mobile networks. One thing I think that really changed in the mobile networking space is mobile networks were built as access networks to do simple things like check email on your BlackBerry and stuff like that. And as we got the full internet experience in mobile and people started using rich media over mobile networks, so on, all of a sudden the economics of the legacy network just didn't work anymore. And that became a very significant trigger point because you couldn't solve the scale problem by making bigger boxes. You had to really re-architect the network. So I think that was a very significant move to NFV. And then I think, quite honestly, operators are very much thinking about what their network architecture is going to look like as they have to compete in the internet economy, and as they move to 5G networks where services will be a lot more personalized, and therefore getting to a software-based architecture is just critically important.
As you may know, a large part of TIA's membership base are equipment suppliers. There was concern more 2 years ago than now, but still a concern about their equipment, their hardware equipment being commoditized. Should that still be a concern, or should that be considered an opportunity at this point?
I think that this is, the move to NFV is really taking networks that used to be made out of hardware platforms that were distributed all over the country to now proliferating software that runs in data centers. That's a very different model. Networks will look dramatically different and simpler as a result of that. So the economics of this business are changing quite significantly. I think hardware suppliers who attempt to delay that and try to preserve the ability to sell their legacy platforms are ultimately not going to succeed because they're going to fall behind the innovation curve. I think there's tremendous opportunity here, but the opportunity is different. It's not about just continuing to milk in some ways what you've already done. And if you don't adapt to that, you're going to be in big trouble.
A large part of the discussion here at ONS is the deployment of NFV and SDN. Again, not long ago we were talking about the what-ifs of these technologies. Now we're talking about the real-world deployments of these. Can you give us an example of that real-world scenario?
Sure. So at a firm we have 25 commercial deployments that we're involved in, and they're all a little bit different. One of the ones that's been talked about perhaps the most is the deployment with AT&T, where they are in with both feet in terms of virtualizing their networks. But we have quite a broad set of deployments, from anything from the Internet of Things type of applications to consumer LTE networks to enterprise networks. And we have major tier 1 operators deploying with us in the US, in Europe, in Japan, and Korea. So this is definitely a global phenomenon, and it's one that's being supported by some of the largest operators in the world.
It seems to me, and this is my opinion, again, over recent time, that carriers viewed new entrants in the network space to be competitors, but now they're really partnering with these even OTTs, carriers and OTTs together. Again, an opportunity for carriers, or do they still view them as competitors?
I think it's a great opportunity. And really, at the end of the day, I think where operators need to focus and are starting to focus is, in order to add value even for OTT services, one of the things that they need is a lot of agility. The great thing about the OTT guys is that new ideas spring up very, very quickly and spring up every day. So the operator has to be able to operate on those type of timescales. And the reality is legacy networks don't allow you to do that. So having flexible networks that reduces your cost of innovating and trying out new ideas will be a big plus in terms of operators being able to really react in those types of timeframes. But that's the speed of the internet economy, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for operators to go well beyond just being access providers to providing a lot of these services and adding value to the services that are out there.
So I know that you've been in support of NFV for many, many years, long before this became a sexy trend, if you will. What was the catalyst for that involvement in NFV that many years ago?
Yeah, we started, affirmed several years before the NFV, the trend became really codified into the ETSI working group. And our rationale for this really was an observation of the market. The one thing that was very clear was that the rate at which data was growing was far outstripping Moore's Law. You just couldn't commoditize networks fast enough to support the data growth. And then you couldn't drive enough revenue if you didn't participate in these IP services. And therefore, we looked at those two facts and we said the network just has to look different in order to support those two areas. And we developed a thesis around what that meant. And sure enough, that led us to a software-centric architecture that we started developing. when NFV came out as with the white paper in the ETSI working group, it just really in a lot of ways legitimized what we were doing. And so the catalyst was really market-driven change that we anticipated would have to happen for the operators. And knock on wood, that's the way the world's playing out.
So Hassan, to wrap this up, if you could predict or forecast what the NFV landscape would look like over the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, what would that look like?
I think the trend is unstoppable. What we see just even in the last 6 months is the rate of trials and things has just increased significantly because this has become part of the psyche of how operators are moving forward. So I think if you look back 5 years, I think one of the great things I'm looking forward to is 5 years from now, I'd like to be able to look back and say, yeah, you know what, networks look completely different than they used to, and we had a hand in changing that, and I believe that's what'll happen. The momentum is really there to support that.
Hassan, it was nice talking to you.
Same here, thank you.